The sight of an osprey with a fish in its talons is familiar to many people who live on the coast, but there was a time when, because of DDT, ospreys were not a common sight. Even today, ospreys in some areas are still struggling as humans overharvest cornerstone species in the marine ecosystem. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sophie Larson. I am the Communication and Outreach Assistant this season at the Seabird Institute. I am so excited to be speaking with Remy Moncrieffe today about ospreys and the forage fish populations they depend on. Remy is the Marine Conservation Policy Manager for National Audubon Society, where he works to promote a healthy marine ecosystem by protecting marine and coastal and estuarine areas. As part of Audubon, Remy has studied the relationship between ospreys and the forage fish that they depend on, I believe specifically in the Chesapeake Bay. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I would like to point out also that there will be a chance for audience members to ask questions at the end, so stay tuned for that. But without further ado, welcome, Remy.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for coming. So, to start off, I was just wondering if you could go over a little bit of your background and your work with Audubon.
Sure. So my background is primarily in fisheries biology and benthic biochemistry. I have a joint master's from the European Union from France and Greece in aquaculture and in natural fisheries policy. And then on top of that, I just do a lot of plants and animals. So I do a lot of coastlines, wetlands, estuaries, marine protected areas, and some oil and natural gas stuff. So I'm kind of well based in the marine ecosystem and well based in fisheries and seabirds. And then I kind of use all that background information to do what I can to advocate for seabirds like osprey, terns, puffins, um, pelicans, kind of the gambit of whatever birds are found on the coast.
Very cool. And I got connected with you because of an article that you wrote for Audubon about ospreys. What drew you to the species, and what do you find fascinating about ospreys?
So I've grown up in the Chesapeake Bay area, Virginia coast, for my entire childhood. Like I went to George Mason University, I went to school around here. And ospreys are one of the key birds that gets people into fish, wildlife in the coast. Virginia has the largest population of ospreys in the planet. About 10,000 to 12,000 breeding pairs come to Chesapeake Bay every year. And because of that, we get to see the bridge, that very visual gap between the thing we can see, which is birds, and the thing we can't really see, which is fish, ocean, wildlife. And so it creates this very tangible and this very emotional bridge between these ecosystems. And I find that people relate best when they can see something above ground and above the water and associate with something below the water.
Interesting. And how does that relationship and dynamic play out for the ospreys in the Chesapeake Bay?
Anyone that's gone to the coast has seen and loved an osprey kind of diving into the water, grabbing a fish and flying away. Um, they different species between salt or high salinity and low salinity environments, but you can kind of see the very visual gap between nutrients going from the ocean into the osprey and then transferring to where they live, which is coastal and land-based ecosystems. And so that bridge is just a very visual example of that interplay of a much larger food web and much larger type of connection that is honestly very easy, especially for those places that are more landlocked, to kind of overlook and ignore, either intentionally or unintentionally. It happens that sometimes if you're too far inland, you lose track that the what happens on the coastlines and the ocean also really does impact you. And that's because birds are mobile, they migrate, they're everywhere, and they do rely on these sources that we can't necessarily see in front of us.
Very interesting. And what are the biggest struggles that the osprey are facing right now?
In the Chesapeake Bay, the two biggest struggles are obviously climate change, because that's a struggle for everything, but food sources, overfishing, um, lack of availability to food sources, and particularly in Chesapeake Bay, it's a menhaden problem. It's the lack of the ability for them and their young to get the fish they need, especially during key fledging and migration periods, to sustain healthy populations of chicks. We're seeing uh, not a collapse, but we're definitely seeing a huge loss in fledgling chicks year over year. The numbers compared to 1980 are honestly tragic. And this is the largest tragedy to really start befalling the Osprey since the DDT problem. And kind of seeing those things happen to this very visual reminder of ecosystem health for the bay, for the coastline, it's heartbreaking. And it's something that a lot of people I've talked to, both Audubon members, not Audubon members, it's something they really relate to. It's something they want to see change. So that's definitely impacted me and why I care so much about this particular species.
Interesting. And just to loop back a little bit for folks that might not be familiar, what is menhaden and how does it affect the ospreys?
So menhaden is often called the most important fish in the sea. It's basically, think of, everyone knows what a sardine is. Everyone knows what kind of these small bait fish are. Menhaden are like that. They are small, fatty fish that a lot of seabirds need to survive. They provide quick and easy nutrients for migration routes. They are small, so they can fit into the beaks of small chicks easily. And they are all up and down the Atlantic coast and Gulf of Mexico. Um, they are all the entire Atlantic population of menhaden comes into Chesapeake Bay to spawn every year. And that's why it is so key for osprey habitat in these high salinity environments. They are, it's safe to say they are the backbone of the marine ecosystem as we know it. And they are used all up and down the coast, not just for osprey, but for things like the lobster fishery, the bait fishery, crabs. It's just so important that these fish are protected to the best of our ability because what happens to them really impacts the small businesses, birds, and coastline ecosystem as a whole.
Interesting. And what is causing the population of these fish to change?
There are a couple of factors. Like most things in the aquatic environment, there are no borders with fish. They go where they want to, when they want to, when the ecosystem and conditions ask them to or make them do that. With fish, the two things that are the highest cause are climate change, shifting currents, and overfishing. Menhaden are one of the most popular trawling fish on in the Chesapeake Bay, and this fishing habits and these fishing practices are impacting them. It's safe to say that the menhaden population is just so impactful that we need to figure out ways to conserve this fish in a way that is going to allow both our small businesses and our bird populations to survive. And the current practice we have now with menhaden, the current relationship, is not sustainable long term.
Interesting. And what kind of changes do you think are needed to help protect the ospreys in this respect? And also, like you mentioned, human populations that rely on this kind of cornerstone species in the marine ecosystem.
There are a couple of things we can do. The first is helping to build the story because people are still kind of unfamiliar with the role that these forage fish species like menhaden have on bird populations like osprey. Informing people that these things are linked together and allowing them to tell their own story is definitely key towards building the knowledge we need to really have people understand the importance of these different animals and species. And the second thing is we need to do better about menhaden conservation and forage fish conservation as a whole. It's not just menhaden too. It's fish like Atlantic herring. It's fish like sardines. It's fish like menhaden. All these things are just so important to the overall health of their ecosystems. And we aren't doing enough from a policy standpoint to really recognize that, to really protect them. We need better ecosystem-based management with forage for species. We need to do a better job of getting science we need around menhaden, around these forage populations. We need better protections to prevent against bycatch and accidentally taking species that we aren't targeting with large fishing operations. We need to do a better job of kind of reining in large industrial fishing in some of these nearshore waters because they are harming our small businesses and our recreational anglers. They're harming our coastlines. We just need a better job of kind of combining all these issues and spreading knowledge about how important these forage fish populations are to everything on the coast. even if we can't see it.
Really cool. And just kind of looping back to how this affects the ospreys. So, would you mind painting a little bit of a picture of what it means for the ospreys when these fisheries suffer, and what that looks like and how they struggle?
Yes, of course. So osprey are migratory species, and they usually have only a couple of chicks a year. They require quite a bit of food to survive, especially during these migratory or high stress periods. The parents will go get a fish, bring it back to the nest, and feed the chick. And there's only one or two of them. And so if the fish isn't fat enough, isn't big enough, or the chicks aren't getting that constant source of food, they will die. They'll end up weak. And the parents will either abandon the fish, abandon the chick, abandon the nest. And we're seeing that. We're seeing that especially in these high salinity environments, these high salinity, high salty, lower bay populations of osprey that really rely on menhaden as their primary food source. Osprey in these areas eat a ton of menhaden. They eat so much. But they don't eat nearly the numbers that are being caught by industrial fishing operations. They need just a fraction of that. And so we need to allow them the space to recover. We need to allow them the space to feed their chicks. We need to allow them the space they need to really deal with some of these large environmental changes that we can't control as people, like climate change or like heavy pollution or shifting tides. We can control fishing. We can control how we fish, when we fish, how much we fish. And that's the easiest thing we can do, in my opinion, to help these osprey populations breed their chicks into adulthood and give them the chance they need to recover.
Interesting. And so you mentioned before, and you mentioned just now again, how climate change is affecting the osprey populations. Could you go a little bit into that a little bit deeper? And does that affect the osprey specifically, or is it affecting the forage fish and thus affecting the ospreys?
The answer to that question is yes to all. Is that, yeah, it's that climate change is kind of the overall driver of economic and environmental change. It is everything from a shifting tide to more storms to hotter conditions to colder conditions to just weird conditions. Um, Fish and certain fish need a certain temperature of water in order to spawn, in order to breed, and in order to live. If that water shifts up and for or up or down, populations of fish will shift with it to keep in that temperate zone or keep at that temperature of water that they want to survive. Because of that, we're seeing menhaden change when they come into the Chesapeake Bay. And as you know, all these things are linked, as in butterflies will pollinate flowers based on when they open up their flowers, and those things can be so precise that even a week off and it won't work. We're seeing this in fish populations, where these fish come into the bay during a certain months of the year. The birds need to have access to the fish during their critical months of the year, and these two things are linked together. So if the fish are late or the birds are early, things are going to change and things aren't going to go well. We're seeing that all up and down the coast. We're seeing fish populations arrive late or get there early. We're seeing birds populations have less access to fish, particularly in regards to this. We're seeing increased storms, which are disrupting some of these habitats that haven't been exposed to these weather events. We're seeing increased cold or increased heat, which is throwing off breeding pairs and breeding populations and spawning periods. And all these things are combining to form this mismatch of a lattice which has been established for tens of thousands of years, being collapsed over the course of just, one or two human lifespans.
Yeah, and I love that metaphor, the lattice. And I often think of biodiversity as like a net that's holding us up. And then the more we take out pieces of that net, the more likely we are to kind of fall through and for that to collapse. But I wonder if you know specifically what would be lost in terms of ecosystem services if the osprey population were to decline, and what role they play in the ecosystem.
Yeah, so osprey are a large environmental indicator, as in there are two things associated with them, the stuff we can see and the stuff we can't. The health of the osprey tends to mimic things in the larger ecosystem. As in, if osprey aren't getting enough forage fish, then down the line, bait fisheries won't get enough forage fish. Other animals won't get enough forage fish. Things we can't see aren't getting enough to eat. This has a huge impact, especially on coastal tourism, where small businesses across the coast will have less access to the fish they need to run their bait fisheries for striped bass, for lobster, for crabs. And then there's also the bird tourism and the bird tourism industry, where people just go to the coast. I gave a presentation at the Colonial Beach, Virginia Osprey Festival, which is just a festival designed around osprey in Virginia. And we have tons of those. It's such a celebrated bird that
Mm.
this is kind of a huge thing, just ecotourism wise. And then osprey are also migratory. So less osprey here means less osprey other places. So other countries, other places they nest and land and migrate to will just have less birds and there's less tourism and economy there. And then there's also the environmental loss, where apex predators are one of the things that helps drive an ecosystem. It helps drives nutrient transfer. It helps lose that really important connection between the sea and the land. And they are one of those bridges. And so the loss of osprey means a loss of transfer of nutrients to places that need it through the use of food and bones and nitrogen and chemicals and phosphorus and just a transfer of nutrients that really helps keep all these coastline ecosystems going in a flow.
That is so interesting, and I hadn't heard about the Osprey Festival, but that sounds super fun. Um, are there any so I've come to notice ospreys are this charismatic character. Many people's spark birds. Are there any trade-offs, do you think, to having ospreys be this charismatic character? Um, just because, just even if there's a festival about ospreys, that doesn't necessarily people know about the struggles they face or kind of uh, the ecosystem as a whole. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I'm particularly biased because I love this bird. But I don't think there's any trade-off to having such a charismatic bird. Um, I mean, it's one of the reasons I got into fish because, dolphins live in the water, and when dolphins are around, you go to fish. Is Osprey drive a conversation that needs to happen in a really approachable way for everybody. They are um, kind of a great mascot, a really great visual mascot that makes it approachable for people to understand wildlife and understand the coastlines in a greater fashion. Understand fishing, understand the bridge, understand the ecosystem, understand other birds. And so I having them, have festivals. For example, at the Osprey Festival, they had a California condor come around. They had other rare birds like owls and condors, and they had booths explaining how other rare birds migrate. And it just creates this community-minded introduction to something that is oftentimes bigger than us. And yeah, so I would say there is no drawback to having Osprey as a mascot.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I agree. What do you think? So you spoke a little bit about the policy changes that need to happen to help protect this species and also, the ecosystem as a whole. I wonder how to engage the community more and what people can do in their own backyard to help uh, this species.
Yes, of course. So the first thing that I usually get asked when I talk about men hating their fish is they ask me why I'm talking about them. And then I have to remind them that birds eat fish. And then they go, "Oh, wow, I forgot about that." Um, the first thing or the best thing we can do is bridging the gap, bridging the knowledge gap between fish and birds. It's reminding people that these things are linked together and encouraging them to both learn more and giving them the knowledge to learn more about why and how these things are linked. When I do that, I find that it really sparks an interest in the marine habitat and marine environment. The second thing you can do at home is Audubon regularly does action alerts and membership engagements with comment periods and rulemaking and emails, and really ask your legislatures and policy experts for help in pursuing bird-friendly and coastline-friendly legislation. That's something I do for national is marine conservation policy. And so I regularly advocate up and down the federal legislature to protect coastlines, protect wetlands, protect these areas of water that our osprey and birds and fish need to survive. Really engaging with those avenues for policy change is something that our membership, something that you can do at home. Sometimes just sending off an email to a legislator, sometimes it's just signing an action or a petition. You don't need to do something big oftentimes to make a difference. You can just do what you can do. And that is kind of one of the easiest ways that people can kind of get involved. I encourage everybody to learn more about ways they can kind of get involved with their own personal legislation and their own personal causes from home, because a lot of it is easy. We just don't know about it.
So interesting. And yeah, I'll definitely, when we log off, look more into that. I was wondering, I know you are a forage fish expert. Are you aware at all of like predators of the ospreys? Um, just because we have had on the Audubon Boathouse Cam lately, the pair that has nested there has been suffering from predation from a great horned owl, which has caused the pair not to nest there this season. And I was just wondering if you knew anything about that sort of dynamic.
Yes, so with a lot of apex species, going after adults isn't the easiest thing they do. They usually predate the chicks and they predate the eggs. So invasive species like snakes are a huge example of predation eggs. Scavenger species like other scavenger birds, like great horned owls, for example, will predate the eggs when they leave. Pelicans will straight up just steal their fish when after they catch them. Pelicans are known for that sort of behavior. And so a lot of the dynamic isn't on the adult birds themselves. It's on the smaller ones. It's on the chicks. It's on the eggs. It's on their food sources. They compete with other seabirds for menhaden for forage fish. Osprey are very successful hunters, and a lot of other birds aren't. And so they've learned to just wait for the osprey to expend its energy and then take the fish from it. Those are kind of the interactions we see the most. Especially in a lot of nesting areas, osprey are predated by invasive species. So kind of understanding those interactions as well.
Oh, it's interesting. I hadn't heard about that. And I didn't know about so the stealing of their catch. That's called kleptoparasitism, correct?
Hmm.
So that's interesting. Our the great horned owl that we have at Todd Wildlife Sanctuary got very bold last season and took a whole adult female, which
Wow.
which was crazy. And I think they have not nested there again. Probably
That's insane.
for the best, but it was crazy. And our audience, yeah, it was a wild sight to see. But just do want to remind our audience members we do have questions at the end. So if you have questions, please feel free to submit. But I think kind of a few wrap up questions I have. Um, so what something that I find really interesting, and you've talked about quite a bit, is this interaction or this connection between land and sea that ospreys and other seabirds provide. And I just wanted to ask just a little bit more in depth what that looks like and how that supports the ecosystem. So the nutrient transfer and that sort of bridge that you've talked about between the land and the sea.
Mhm. So the sun is the world's largest producer. And in the ocean, the sun hits plankton and zooplankton, hits plankton that zooplankton eat. So it creates this energy transfer from the sun directly related to the osprey through a long chain of intermediary species. So the sun will hit the plankton will get eaten by the zooplankton. Menhaden eat zooplankton. So the menhaden eat the zooplankton, they get bigger, and then the osprey eat the menhaden. So it creates this energy transfer from the sun and the energy the sun provides to the osprey. Any gap in that link will interrupt the natural cycles of energy from the sun, and it'll create a less stable ecosystem as a whole. And so these forage fish provide this link because forage fish eat primarily plankton and zooplankton. They provide this link of energy transfer that a lot of other animals can't get to. Like an osprey can't eat zooplankton, an osprey can't eat krill, and all like they can't eat these small things. But these forage fish eat these small organisms, collect all the energy and all the nutrients they provide, and concentrate it in their bodies. And so forage fish are just a bridge between the sun and the rest of the ecosystem, much like plants are the land bridge between the sun and the terrestrial ecosystem.
Really interesting. Yeah, that energy transfer, I find it so cool. And it is a big reason why I love seabirds, not just ospreys, but also, I work for Project Puffin. And that kind of brings me to one of the questions that I'm seeing from our audience members is, do puffins eat menhaden too? I
Yep.
wonder. Yep.
Terns, puffins, or terns, puffins, pelicans, all these seabirds tend to eat menhaden. It is just a very valuable fish. It's easy to catch. It's really oily. The energy you use catching it is less than the energy you use to eat it. And so it's one of those really important species.
And I think you might have already touched on this, but just to remind me, what environments do menhaden uh, thrive in? Like, what is the temperature? Where can we find them?
So the entire Manhattan population of the Atlantic goes into the Chesapeake Bay. There's also a population in the Gulf of Mexico. They tend to stay near shore, especially when juveniles, because they aren't super strong swimmers. And so they tend to travel up and down the coastline, just a couple of miles out from the coast, and stay there, kind of hover around there until they swim back to their spawning grounds. The temperature, I don't wanna quote an exact number off the top of my head. Um, but they do have a specific temperature which they like to spawn in Chesapeake Bay. Um, they tend to be not a benthic, so not a bottom dwelling species. They tend to hover around in the kind of in the middle to the surface of the water column. You
Mm,
can often see them bite plane in large schools.
mhm.
That's a way that industrial fishers can actually track menhaden is using spotter planes because you can just see them and they're massive, massive schools from the air. Uh, and they combine all these things to kind of just being a really approachable species for shorebirds and juvenile birds to eat.
Okay, very interesting. And another question from our audience: are some osprey non-migratory?
I am honestly not sure. I want to say no. I'm pretty sure the population has very distinct migratory patterns. I'm not sure if I mean, I'm sure there is more knowledge out there than I have, but from my familiarity, I believe that osprey are migratory by default.
That's of my knowledge, I can't think of any examples of non-migratory ospreys, but I guess kind of looping back to the habitat connectivity. So how do migratory species how in terms of prey availability, what does that mean for migratory species along their migratory path when prey availability changes because of things like climate change?
So migratory species tend to stop in the same locations year after year, for generations and generations. The two most important places are their breeding grounds and are the breeding grounds and their wintering habitat. Having the food availability in both places is really important. However, there are certain areas where during the migration routes, a lot of birds just stop. These tend to be marshes, tend to be areas of land-sea interactions where they can get quick nutrients and they keep on flying. The food availability in these stops is really, really important, and the food availability in the overwintering grounds and the spawning in the breeding grounds is also really, really important. Um, and for the osprey, this means that Virginia is a really important habitat for them. But there are also populations up and down all coastlines. So populations out in the Great Lakes, populations out on the Pacific coast, populations out further north. and having the availability of this flyaway and giving the food availability there in regards to the marine ecosystem tends to be important not just for osprey, but for all migratory birds that use that area.
Interesting. And so, in terms of policy, when a bird is migratory, and correct me if I'm wrong, do ospreys migrate past the borders of the United States generally?
Yes,
So, in terms of adopting policy to support the osprey, how does kind of national borders affect that?
that's actually a very good question, and it's one of the reasons that Audubon has tried really hard to work with partners in Latin America and Canada to really hone in on some of these bird migratory habitats. And also why laws such as the Migratory Bird Treaty Act exist, because the United States recognizes that birds are migratory, birds go in different countries, and other countries recognize that as well. And there is a shared interest in preserving that habitat across borders. And so there are pretty active agreements with organizations like Audubon in not just overwintering grounds, but also in grounds in other countries. Bahamas, for example, Gulf of Mexico, Canada, um, and kind of recognizing that these two things are linked and that you can try to preserve birds in just one area, but it's significantly less viable to just do it in where they are only half the year.
Mm, yeah, that makes sense. Another question from our audience are there any menhaden in the Pacific Ocean?
I don't actually believe there's a menhaden population in the Pacific. The two that I work primarily on are the Atlantic menhaden and the Gulf of Mexico. But that doesn't mean there aren't forage fish in the Pacific. There absolutely are. But as far as menhaden go, I am primarily concentrated on the Gulf and the Atlantic.
Very cool. Okay. And another question from our audience, and I wonder, I am unfamiliar with uh, this, but they ask, have there been any conclusions on how to address baling twine in osprey nests? Would a different color help? I wonder if you're familiar with baling twine in osprey nests.
I'm familiar with failing twine. I am not familiar with the solutions around it. I am honestly not sure if a different color would help. That is honestly not my particular expertise. And I feel like that's just because uh, one of the things that I'm most focused on is just kind of the fish and providing them with the fish they need. Not to say that that's not the only issue because there are so many others, but that is not something that I have been focused on.
Okay, very cool. And it seems like that might have exhausted. Is there are any other audience questions? Now is the time. Um, but I think that might have exhausted the audience questions for now. And if that is all, I have really loved this conversation. I find ospreys to be so interesting, but also, as I've said a number of times, I think seabirds are so cool just because of that connectivity that you've touched on a number of times. So, getting to talk to somebody who's at the forefront of the work to protect these ecosystems has been such a treat.
Yeah, it's been great kind of learning more about them myself. When I started, I didn't know a whole lot about seabirds. That was several years ago now. And kind of understanding that that is kind of familiar to people, that they want to know more, but they don't know how. And I try to do my best to make it approachable for people to learn more about fish and birds and wildlife and kind of the connection. And it brings me a lot of personal satisfaction to see people start making those connections themselves, to start doing more about it in their own local communities and having just a greater appreciation for it and for fish than maybe they started with before I started talking.
Yeah. I know this is an osprey talk, but I was wondering, as somebody who's got such an expertise in fish, if you have kind of a favorite fish fact that you would like to share.
Oh man. Okay. So, um, when people say like favorite fish fact or favorite fish, um, are we including like cephalopods, like octopi and octopuses in this one? Are we including like sea slugs? Or like where are we going with fish?
Fish is such a broad term. I would say you can include whatever you'd like to include.
Okay, so I got three. First is seahorses are fish. Don't know if you don't know, it's one of those facts that people aren't aware of, but seahorses are in fact really funky shaped fish. The second would be one of my favorite animals is called the Dumbo octopus. Um, And the third is that we didn't know what the color the giant squid was because the only ones we had seen were dead. And so for a long time, a lot of deep sea species, the pressure underwater is so different, especially that far down, that the only samples we got were washed up on shore. And that distorts the
Mm.
color, that distorts what they look like, and we just aren't sure. It's only that with modern technology, very, very modern technology, have we been able to see some of these species, what they look like under the sea, under its habitats. And a lot of them are wild colors. Like the colossal squid, it's golden. Like we thought it was red, it's actually gold. Um,
Whoa, that's so
yeah.
cool. So, for somebody who might be unfamiliar, what is a jumbo octopus?
A Dumbo octopus is a
Dumbo.
species. Dumbo is a species of octopus. It's called a flapjack octopus. It has modified legs that look like this like big flappy ears, and so it looks like Dumbo, the Disney character.
Cool.
It's also wildly cute, insanely cute. Like top three cutest things you've ever seen in the ocean. Cute. It's ridiculous.
That's awesome. I will be looking that up as soon as we get off. But anyway, I would like to just thank you so much for taking the time out to chat with us. It's so interesting. And unless there are any other audience questions, I think, oh, I see one more. Uh, is there a replacement food that ospreys can fish for with dwindling menhaden?
So that's a complicated question in that a lot of seabirds can change food sources, but it takes them a lot of energy to do so. And for birds that grew up on a certain sea for food source or fish, they have to almost unlearn the behaviors they learned as fledglings from their own parents in order to do so. And
Mm,
so a lot of birds will first search for their main primary food source. And again, in mostly lower salinity environments, in higher salinity environments, so close to the ocean for osprey, that is menhaden. They'll search for that first, and then if that's not there, then they'll look for something else. But that takes a lot of energy to do. This does not apply, at least menhaden specifically, does not apply to lower salinity environments because those osprey have grown up not eating menhaden because they're less available in those streams. So they're from the jump eat other fish. So one of those misconceptions is that, oh, menhaden are dwindling, the birds can just swap something else like their lower salinity, lower salt cousins. They don't do that like that. It doesn't work like that.
mm.
Fish are taught what to hunt from their parents. They're taught what to hunt just by looking at it and being fed it. And they can't swap food sources at the drop of a hat. They have to relearn hunting behavior to do so.
Interesting. It's like if you went to college uh, to be an English major and somebody was like, "Okay, now you do coding," or
Yeah. I compare it to humans, as in if you stop eating meat for a while, then when you start eating meat again, it makes your stomach hurt.
yeah,
It's not you can't eat meat because you're a human. It's that it'll like your body is no longer adapted to it. It's kind of like that, where if birds are forced to stop eating the main fish they hunt, they can adapt, but there is an adaptation period that makes them weaker and kind of threatens their safety of them and their fledglings. And so it's very similar to that.
it is so interesting how behavior can have it. You think of behavior as just choice, but it does have physiological consequences, and having to make a switch rapidly can affect the health of the bird.
Hmm.
Um, so interesting. And last call for questions, but if there's nothing else, I will let you go, Remy. Thank you so much again. It's been just so fun.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. Some really good questions, actually, which is fun.
Yay, I'm glad.